So you've been in the room with Putin. Let me ask you for some advice. And it's also just a good philosophical question for you or for me. If I have a conversation with Vladimir Putin right now, can you advise on what questions, topics, ideas to talk through? To him as a leader, to him as a human. What would you like to understand about his mind, about his thinking?
Yeah, remember what I said before, that Putin always tries to, reverse things. He wants to hear the questions that people have. Because remember, he himself at different points has been a recruiter, which is, the way that you're operating now as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're asking an awful lot of questions. Your questions also betray, often at times where you're thinking about things, the kind of context, kind of any kind of dialogue like this reveals a lot about the other person.
Yeah.
And I've actually often, noticed in these settings that Putin likes to have a lot of give and take. So I think he would actually enjoy having a conversation, with you. But again, he would always be trying to influence you, inform and influence. That's kind of, part of the way that he always operates. So what you would have to, be trying to think about, so what is it you would want to elicit information from him? You're trying to understand the guy's worldview. And what we're trying to also understand is if there's any room there where he might compromise on something. So if your goal was to go in there, to talk about Ukraine at this particular moment, I mean, one of the problems that I've often seen in the sort of the meetings that we've had with Putin, it just ends up in sort of mutual recriminations. Kind of, no, well, what about what you've done? Or no, you've done that about, and there's always this whataboutism. I mean, it often say, well, you're saying that I've done this, but you've done that. The United States invaded Iraq. What's the difference between, what I'm doing and all of the things that you've been doing here? I mean, what you would have to try to do is kind of elicit information about why or what he is thinking about this particular moment in time and why he thinks it.
Yeah, the whataboutism is a failure case. I think that shows from all the interviews I've seen that with him, that just shows that he doesn't trust the person on the other side.
No, he doesn't.
Right. But I'm not cynical like people. They seem to think he's some kind of KGB agent that doesn't trust anybody. I disagree. I think everybody's human, and from my perspective, I'm worried about what I've seen. Is I think whether it's COVID, whether it's uh, other aspects that I'm not aware of leading up to the invasion, he seems to be less willing to have charismatic back and forth dialogue.
Yeah, an open discussion. Actually, I said, you asked me before about, that issue of trust, and he often says he only trusts himself. And I said, he's often, distrustful of people, but he does trust some people for certain things where he knows it's within their competence.
Yeah.
So he has people he trusts to do things because, he knows they'll do them and he knows that they'll do them well, which is why, he has his, old buddies from, St. Petersburg, because he's known them for a very long time. And he knows that they won't, try to pull a fast one over him, but he also knows their strengths and their weaknesses and what they can be trusted to do. I mean, he's learning that, some of the people in the military that he, thought were competent or people on other things are not, right? And he tends to actually have a lot of loyalty to people as well.
Mm-hmm.
Or he also kind of thinks it's best to keep them inside the tent than outside. And he moves them around. He kind of, he gives them multiple chances to redeem themselves if they don't. It's not like he has them done in. I mean, there is a lot of that in the system. But the people that he's worked with for a long time, he moves them around to something else, perhaps where they can do less harm. Although, we've often seen that he has quite a small cadre of people that he's reliant on, and often, they're not up to the task, which is kind of what's happening here. But he also, in the past, has been more straightforward, just like you were saying here, more pragmatic. And I think, if you engaged with him in Russian, where you're actually literally speaking the same language, because there's so much lost in translation.
Right.
I used to jump out my skin listening to some of the phone calls because, the way that they kind of relayed, with an interpreter.
Oh, because you're listening to the translation?
No, because I'm listening to the Russian and the translation,
and
which
the
is
translation?
happening, in real time. And having been at a translators institute is really difficult.
Yeah.
Look, an interpreters are trained in the moment to do something, the synchrony perivod, the synchronized or the real-time translation. So translation is an art as well as a skill.
Mhm.
If you're doing simultaneous translation, that's the word in English, it's synchronny перевод in Russian. You're kind of focused in the moment on the fragments of the discussion, trying to render it as accurately as you possibly can. And when you come out of that, you can't relay the entire conversation. And often, what translators do is they take this little shorthand note like journalists do. And afterwards, they've just been caught up in the moment and they haven't got the big picture. Consecutive translation is different. Kind of you're trying to convey the whole mood of like big chunks of dialogue that have already been there. But, sometimes you might not get that right either. And it breaks up the flow of the discussion.
That's terrible.
And often it's, the kind of the person who translates, it's different. Some of our best translators are women. But, hearing a woman's voice, translating a guy who has a particular guy's way of speaking and a macho way of speaking and a crude way of speaking, be that Putin, or I've seen that happen with Erdogan, the president of Turkey, and it gets translated by a much more refined, female speaker. You've just lost the whole thing. And, many of the translators on the Russian side are not competent in English in the way that you would hope they are. It's not just that they're not native speakers. They're just not trained to the same high standards they used to be in the past.
Yes.
And you lose the nuance, you lose the feel. You almost need, kind of the interpretive actor, doing, the kind of the interpretation for that. You need to match it as much as you can in the way that you do voiceovers in film. The best way to talk to Putin is one-on-one in his own language. I mean, I have a really great friend here who is one of the best interpreters of Putin. Is often asked by the media to interpret for him. He was at the institute that I was at. I mean, I know him from that kind of period, and he is just excellent. Just like Pavel Palashenko was absolutely phenomenal at interpreting Gorbachev. Now, he didn't always interpret him accurately because Gorbachev made lots of grammatical gaffes, and sometimes was, Gorbachev himself would joke that Palashenko, spoke better for Gorbachev than Gorbachev could himself. Yeah. But Putin is actually quite precise and careful in the way that he speaks, because there's a lot of menace sometimes to things deliberately. Other times there's lots of humor, and he's telling a joke for a particular reason. And a lot of it is, he actually uses the richness of the Russian language and the crudity of language that can't be conveyed in English.
But also facial expressions.
Yeah, facial expressions, body language, the way that he sits back in the chair and slouches, the kind of the way that he makes fun of people, and he, kind of uses irony. Just some of it is just lost, and it needs to be conveyed.
The depth of humor and wit. I've met quite a few like political leaders like that in the speak only Russian when I was traveling in Ukraine. I don't know how you translate that. I think it's almost the other person that reminds me like that a little bit is Obama. Obama had a wit and an intelligence, but he would smile as he said something that add a lot to it, like that he's trolling you or he's being sarcastic, or it's me converting into words. It's obvious that all English speakers, if they listen to Obama, but if you had to translate to a different language, I think you're going to lose a lot of.
Yeah, I mean, when I watched I watched many of Putin's speeches, kind of just in Russian, not looking at any of the, the subtitles or anything, and it's just watching the way that his body language is at the time when he's saying things, the way that he'll smirk, he'll sneer, he'll laugh, he'll ad lib, kind of from something that obviously kind of, wasn't there on the prepared speech, and it's really critical. And kind of some people speak, like Trump, it's kind of just words. Putin, the words are very important. Trump, it's the atmosphere. It's the kind of the way you feel about things. It's the buzz you get. It's revving people up. It's the kind of slogans. And Putin, it's, he's conveying a lot in what he's saying there.
But I think, of course, I don't know much because I only speak Russian and English. But I have, in English or Russian, have not met almost anyone ever as interesting in conversation as Putin. I think he shines not in speeches, but in interactions with others.
Yeah, when you watch those interviews and things with him, and I've been at many of these sessions, it's been hours of him parrying questions. And it's like watching a boxer sparring, in a kind of training bout. Yeah, come on, give me another one. And it's kind of like, and he prides himself, and he's made mistakes often, but the breadth of, the issues that he's often covered has been interesting, has been fascinating. And I used to just take, kind of really detailed notes about this because you learn a ton. But it's also about his worldview again. I mean, he does live in a certain box like we all do. And, again, his world experience is not as extensive as, you would hope it would be. But that's why you have to really pay attention. That's where we've messed up. That's where we haven't really paid a lot of attention to what he's been saying. He's been telegraphing this grievance, this dissatisfaction, this I'm going to do something for years.
And the thing is, during wartime, combined with propaganda and the narratives of resentment and grievance, that you dig in on those. Like, maybe you start out not believing it, but you're sure as hell going to believe it eventually.
Well, you convince yourself over time. Yeah. Look, the longer you're in a position like Putin, 22 years now, coming on 23 years, could be out there for 36 years. You become more and more rigid. I mean, this is, again, something that you see in history. You look at, people through history have moved from kind of being kind of left-wing and, in their perspectives to hard right. They kind of have a sort of an ossification or a rigidity emerges in their views. I mean, again, I used to have these arguments with Professor Pice about Lenin, because he would talk about Lenin. I said, yeah, but he didn't change his mind from being 18. Have you not thought about that? I mean, it's like we're not fully formed individuals at 18. We don't know anything. We know something, but not everything. I mean, and obviously the younger context, the kind of the way that you kind of grow up, the place you grow up, the things that happen to you, the traumas you have. I mean, all of these have an impact. But then if you don't grow beyond all of that, and Putin's been stuck in place since 2000 when he became president. He's not out and about, kind of being a man of the people. He's not doing the kind of things he used to do. Yeah, he gets out there and he goes to Kazakhstan and, kind of Tajikistan, and he goes to China and he does this and that. And then to COVID, he didn't go anywhere. I mean, very few places. And so he's got stuck. And that worries me a lot, because you could see before that he, had a bit more of flexibility of thought. And that's why nobody should be in place forever. You should always kind of like get out there and go out there and learn a new skill, kind of. You need to sort of, you needed to get out more and do something different.